The moment my uncle leaned in and whispered, "You're not really part of this bloodline. Stop pretending," my world shattered in front of a church full of family. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. I'm Mara Quinn, 28, and until that day, I believed I belonged, at least to someone. My family always looked perfect from the outside. My mom Elaine was kind but distant, my dad Darren was calm and fair, and my older brother Reed was everyone's favorite. We grew up in Savannah, Georgia, where family meant everything, or so I thought. At my niece's baptism, I felt proud to stand there as the godmother. The church was warm and full of laughter. Then my Uncle Russell came up to me, leaned close, and whispered those words that cut deeper than any knife. I laughed it off at first, thinking he was being cruel for no reason. But when I looked into my mom's eyes later that day, something in her face changed. Fear, guilt, something she couldn't hide. That night, I asked her about it. She shook her head and said, "Russell's had too much to drink. Don't pay attention to him." But I knew she was lying. I started noticing little things, how I looked nothing like anyone else, how my baby photos stopped around age 1, how conversations died when I entered the room. A week later, I searched through my father's old study and found a locked drawer. Inside were papers, sealed adoption forms with my name on them. My hands shook as I read the words. Everything I believed about my life was a lie. When I confronted my mother, she broke down and admitted it. "We wanted to protect you," she said. "You were never supposed to know." She confessed they had adopted me secretly and told no one outside the family. But what crushed me most was realizing that everyone, Reed, Russell, even my grandmother, had known all along. Reed didn't even try to comfort me. He smirked and said, "You should be grateful. Mom and Dad saved you." That broke something inside me. I moved out that week and decided never to look back. A few months later, my father passed away. At the reading of his will, I found out he'd left me nothing. Reed inherited everything. Mom just said, "Your father thought it was only fair since you're not blood." That night, I promised myself I'd build my own life and never need them again. I worked day and night, starting my own interior design firm. Years later, it became one of the best in Georgia. Then karma came around. Reed's business went bankrupt and Mom's health failed. One day, Reed reached out, asking for help redesigning his house to sell it. He didn't realize my company was the one he'd hired. When I showed up, he went pale. I told him calmly, "Family isn't blood, it's loyalty. And you lost that years ago." At my niece's next birthday, Uncle Russell tried to speak to me again. I smiled and said, "You were right. I'm not part of your bloodline, and thank God for that." Then I walked away, finally free. I grew up in a family everyone admired in Savannah, Georgia. The Quinns were known for their manners, their house with white columns, and Sunday dinners that looked straight out of a magazine. My dad, Darren, ran a small construction company and was loved in the community. My mom, Elaine, volunteered at church and always made sure our home looked perfect. And then there was Reed, my older brother, the golden boy who could do no wrong. Reed was the one everyone talked about at family gathering. He was handsome, charming, and successful. My parents glowed when they mentioned his name. With me, things were different. They cared, but there was always a distance I couldn't explain. I told myself it was just family dynamics. Some people got more attention, that's all. Still, I loved them deeply. Our house was filled with laughter on holidays, my mom's cooking, my dad's quiet jokes, and Reed's loud confidence. It felt safe, familiar. I thought nothing could ever break that image. When my niece was born, the family's joy doubled. I adored that little girl from the moment I held her. So when Reed and his wife asked me to be her godmother, I said yes without hesitation. I wanted to believe I truly belonged to this family, that I mattered. The day of the baptism felt warm and peaceful. The sun came through the stained glass windows, lighting up the church in soft colors. I stood near the altar, watching my brother hold his baby, feeling proud to be part of that moment. My parents smiled from the front row, surrounded by relatives who chatted and laughed quietly. Everything looked perfect, just as it always had. Then Uncle Russell approached. He had always been blunt, sometimes a little rough around the edges, but he was family. He leaned close, his expression sharp, and whispered words that froze me where I stood. "You're not really part of this bloodline. Stop pretending." The air seemed to vanish from the room. I stared at him, thinking I'd misheard. But his eyes told me he meant every word. My stomach twisted as the priest continued speaking, the baby fussing softly in Reed's arms. Around me, no one seemed to notice what had just happened. The laughter, the prayers, the scent of candles, it all blurred into background noise. I forced a smile, pretending nothing was wrong, but inside, everything cracked. I couldn't focus on the ceremony anymore. My mind replayed his whisper again and again. Why would he say that? What did he mean? When the service ended, relatives hugged each other, and photos were taken. I stood beside my brother and his wife, smiling for pictures I could barely see through the fog in my head. My uncle stood at a distance, watching me. For the first time in my life, I felt like an outsider at my own family's celebration. Something deep inside told me that everything I believed about who I was might be a lie, and I knew I couldn't ignore it. That night after the baptism, I couldn't sleep. My uncle's words kept echoing in my head like a cruel riddle. I told myself it was nonsense, but something deep down refused to believe that. Around midnight, I went to the kitchen, hoping a glass of water would calm me. My mother was there, sitting at the table with her reading glasses on, hands trembling slightly as she folded napkins for the next day's brunch. I took a breath and said softly, "Mom, what did Uncle Russell mean earlier?" She froze, the napkin half folded. For a moment, she didn't look at me. Then she forced a small smile and said, "Oh, honey, he drinks too much. You know how he gets at family events." Her voice wavered, and her fingers fidgeted with the napkin until it tore a little. I wanted to believe her, but her eyes told another story. They didn't hold irritation or surprise. They held fear, guilt, something buried. I let the subject drop, not wanting to push her further, but the silence between us said everything. After she went to bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the family photos hanging on the wall. There were so many pictures of Reed, his school awards, his first car, his graduation. There were photos of my parents when they were young, smiling and proud. But when I looked for pictures of myself, there were fewer. My baby photos stopped abruptly after my first birthday. It was strange. I couldn't remember ever seeing any from when I was an infant. Over the next few days, small details began to stand out. I went through old albums in the living room cabinet. The ones from my childhood looked incomplete. No hospital pictures, no newborn announcements, nothing from before age 2. In one photo of a family picnic, everyone had the same green-gray eyes except me. Mine were darker, almost black. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself it was just genetics, but the thought kept nagging me. At dinner one evening, my parents and Reed were talking about old family stories. When I asked about a vacation I vaguely remembered, everyone went quiet. Then Reed changed the subject so quickly it felt rehearsed. It happened again and again. I'd walk into a room, and conversations would stop. Once, I caught my mom and dad whispering in the den, my name slipping through their sentences like something they didn't want me to hear. I started feeling like a stranger in my own home. Every smile looked forced, every laugh slightly strained. Even the house felt different, colder somehow. I searched for explanations that made sense, but every path led back to my uncle's whisper. Late one night, I pulled out a box of old papers from the attic. Birth certificates, report cards, family documents, all organized neatly. But mine was missing. Every record of my birth gone. My hands shook as I sifted through the pile again, hoping I'd just overlooked it. But it wasn't there. The doubt had grown into something I couldn't ignore. My family had secrets, ones they never meant for me to find. Sleep wouldn't come that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's uneasy smile and heard my uncle's whisper all over again. The silence in the house was heavy, broken only by the creak of the old floorboards. I walked down the hallway barefoot, the air cool against my skin. My father's study door stood slightly open. That room had always been his space, organized, private, full of things no one was allowed to touch. But I couldn't stop myself. I turned on the small desk lamp, its soft light spilling across the dark wood. The room smelled faintly of tobacco and old paper. My father's handwriting covered stacks of notes and ledgers, but I was looking for something else, something hidden. I searched the drawers, one after another, until I reached the bottom one on the left. It didn't open. The lock was small but old. My hands trembled as I grabbed a thin screwdriver from a nearby shelf. With one firm twist, it clicked open. Inside were envelopes tied together with a piece of faded ribbon. My name was written on the top one in my father's handwriting. I felt my chest tighten as I pulled it out. It wasn't a letter. It was an official document. The heading read adoption certificate. My eyes scanned the page again and again, refusing to believe what they were reading. There it was, my name, Mara Quinn, and beneath it, adopted child. The listed parents were Darren and Elaine Quinn. I kept reading, hoping it was some misunderstanding, but there were more papers underneath. Letters from a lawyer, sealed forms, and a hospital record with another woman's name listed under birth mother. My fingers went numb. Every breath felt heavier. My entire life, the family dinners, the childhood memories, every time my mother called me her little girl. It all suddenly felt like part of a story written for someone else. I sat there for a long time, staring at those papers until my tears blurred the ink. The house felt different now, smaller, full of ghosts I hadn't noticed before. When I finally stood, I felt a strange calm. I had my answer. It hurt, but I needed to hear the rest from her. I walked straight to my parents' bedroom. The door was slightly open, light spilling out from a bedside lamp. My mother looked up, startled by the sight of the papers in my hand. "Where did you get those?" she whispered, her voice shaking. I found them in Dad's study, I said quietly. Why didn't you tell me? Why did everyone hide this from me? She covered her mouth, tears filling her eyes. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then, in a voice so small it barely carried across the room, she said, "You were never supposed to know." I stood frozen as she wiped her face with trembling hands. "We adopted you when you were a baby," she continued. "It was supposed to stay between us. You were a secret." Her words broke something inside me. The truth I had wanted for so long had finally come, but it felt nothing like relief. It felt like the end of everything I thought I was. The days after that night passed in a blur. I moved through the house like a ghost, surrounded by people who had smiled in my face for years while hiding the one truth that could break me. I didn't feel anger at first, just a cold emptiness that settled deep in my chest. Everywhere I looked, I saw the signs I had missed. The quiet looks between relatives, the small pauses when family history came up, the way my grandmother always hugged Reed tighter than me. Now it all made sense. When my mother finally told the rest of the family that I knew, no one seemed surprised. That hurt the most. My uncle avoided my eyes at dinner, stirring his coffee like he hadn't been the one to tear my world apart. My grandmother patted my hand gently and said, "We only wanted what was best for you." I stared at her, wondering how love could look so calm while covering up a lie for nearly 3 decades. But Reed's reaction was worse than all of them. He waited until our parents had left the room, then leaned against the counter with that smug grin I'd always hated. "You're taking this too personally," he said. "It's not like they didn't treat you well." I tried to hold back my tears. "You all lied to me," I said quietly. "Every single one of you." He shrugged, his tone flat, almost bored. "You should be grateful, Mara. Mom and Dad saved you. You were lucky they took you in." The words hit harder than any slap. I stood there, staring at him, trying to understand how someone I'd grown up with could sound so heartless. "Saved me?" I repeated. "Like I was a stray they picked up?" He didn't even flinch. "You were never really one of us," he said, his voice low and sharp. "You know that now, so stop pretending." I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. Instead, I walked past him, my hands shaking, and stepped out onto the porch. The evening air was cold against my skin, but I barely felt it. Behind me, the house that had once felt like home now felt like a place built on lies. The betrayal sank deeper with every breath. My family hadn't just hidden the truth. They had chosen to let me live my entire life as the only one who didn't know. Every birthday candle I'd blown out surrounded by fake smiles, every "we're so proud of you," every family portrait, they had all been part of the same deception. The next morning, I packed a small bag. My mother cried quietly, asking me to stay, but her words didn't reach me. My father didn't say much, just nodded, like he'd expected this. Reed didn't even come downstairs. As I closed the door behind me, I realized it wasn't the adoption that had broken me. It was the years of pretending, the love built on secrets, the comfort that was never real. They hadn't just kept the truth from me, they had erased me from it. I left that house with a small suitcase and a heart that felt too heavy to carry. I found a small apartment near the river, quiet and empty, nothing like the home I grew up in. The first few nights, I barely slept. The silence pressed down on me, and every sound from the street outside made me feel more alone. But I needed distance. I needed air that wasn't filled with lies. Weeks passed slowly. My mother called a few times, leaving short messages that I didn't return. I tried to focus on work, but nothing felt real anymore. Then, one morning, my phone rang, and I knew before answering that something was wrong. My mother's voice broke through the line, trembling and soft. "Mara," she whispered, "your father's gone." The world tilted for a moment. I sat on the edge of my bed, gripping the phone as if I could stop the words from sinking in. My father, Darren, the man who had taught me how to ride a bike, who once sat through every school play even when I forgot my lines, was gone. Despite everything, I loved him. And now I would never have the chance to ask him why he had chosen to hide the truth. The funeral felt like watching a movie I wasn't supposed to be in. Reed greeted people like a host, shaking hands, giving speeches. My mother cried in the front row, and no one looked at me for long. I sat quietly in the back, invisible among people who once called me family. A week later, I received a call from the family lawyer. He asked me to come for the reading of the will. I didn't expect much, but a small part of me hoped my father had left something, a letter, a note, anything to show that I still mattered. The office was cold and smelled of paper and coffee. Reed sat across from me, confident as ever, his tie perfect. The lawyer opened the folder and began reading. As he went through the list, my name never came up. Everything, our family home, the business, the savings, went to Reed. Not a single mention of me. When the lawyer closed the file, the silence in the room was deafening. My mother stared at the floor, her face pale. Finally, she spoke in a voice that sounded too calm. "Your father didn't think it was appropriate," she said, "since you're not blood." For a second, I couldn't breathe. The words burned like acid. Not blood. as if love had ever needed proof. I looked at her, waiting for her to take it back, but she didn't. Reed just smirked, and that smirk told me everything about what my place in their world truly was. I walked out of that office without a word. The sky outside was gray, heavy with rain. Standing there on the sidewalk, drenched and shaking, something inside me shifted. The sadness that had been eating me alive turned into something colder, sharper. That day, I made myself a promise. They had taken everything from me: truth, family, belonging. But I would take back my power. I would rebuild myself, stronger than any of them imagined. And one day, they would remember the moment they decided I wasn't worthy, and they would regret it. The weeks after the will reading felt endless, but pain has a strange way of reshaping people. Once the tears stopped coming, something inside me hardened. I didn't want sympathy, and I didn't want their apology. I wanted to become someone they could never ignore again. I threw myself into work. I started small, picking up design projects for friends and local cafes. I worked every hour I could find, early mornings, late nights, weekends. During the day, I managed front desks and answered phones. At night, I studied design software, read business guides, and took freelance decorating jobs. My body ached most days, but I didn't care. Every late hour reminded me that I was building something on my own name. No family name, no favors. Little by little, clients started coming back with compliments. A restaurant owner loved how I transformed his space. A young couple recommended me to their friends. Soon, I was designing small homes, then larger ones. My style became known for warmth and precision, details that made a house feel alive. When I finally opened my own firm, I called it Haven Studio. It was the one place that truly felt like mine. Years passed, and the business grew faster than I ever expected. I hired a team, expanded into Atlanta, and began working with developers across Georgia. Every milestone felt like proof that I didn't need their acceptance to matter. Success didn't erase the hurt, but it filled the emptiness with something steadier: pride. I didn't see much of my family after that, but news about them had a way of finding me. Reed's investment company, the pride of the Quinn name, started to crumble. Bad deals, risky projects, one mistake after another. Eventually, it folded completely, taking their savings with it. Their perfect image cracked in public. The house I'd grown up in was put up for sale. My mother's health started to fail soon after. I heard about it through an old neighbor who still sent me Christmas cards. She said Elaine had been in and out of the hospital, that Reed was struggling to keep up with the bills. I listened quietly, thanked her, and hung up. My heart tightened, but I didn't reach out. I told myself they had made their choices. There were moments I drove past their neighborhood, watching from a distance as the world they'd built slowly collapsed. The white columns of our old house were chipped now, the garden overgrown. The perfection they had guarded so fiercely was gone. Sometimes, late at night, I wondered if they thought about me, if they ever regretted the words that pushed me out. But I never called, never wrote. My revenge wasn't in shouting or anger. It was in living well, in turning the pain they gave me into power they could never take away. Every time a new client shook my hand, every time a project finished beautifully, I felt the same quiet satisfaction. They had once made me feel like I didn't belong. Now they were the ones fading into silence, and I had become everything they believed I couldn't be. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I was in my office, going through blueprints for a new client, when my assistant walked in holding a folder. "We got an inquiry from a man named Reed Quinn," she said casually, not realizing that name once belonged to the center of my pain. My hand froze over the desk. I took the folder, and there it was, his name, his signature, and the address of my childhood home. The details were brief. He wanted help redesigning a property that had been foreclosed, hoping to restore it for resale. The tone of his email was polite but tired. There was no trace of the proud man who once looked down on everyone. I read it twice, then a third time, before leaning back in my chair. It almost felt unreal. The man who had once told me I wasn't family was now asking for help from the company I built alone. He had no idea who owned Haven Studio. My company name carried no personal link to me anymore. My full name wasn't listed on the website, and I preferred it that way. The thought made me smile. Fate had an odd sense of humor. I decided to take the job, but not as myself. I signed the contract using my middle name and the surname Hale, Ms. Hale. I told my team I would personally oversee the project. No one questioned it. I was known for handling select clients myself. The day I arrived at the property, a wave of memories hit me. The once grand house looked broken, stripped of its shine. The paint had peeled from the walls, the windows were dull, and the garden was overrun with weeds. It was almost poetic, how time had turned this place into a reflection of the people who once lived there. Reed met me at the door, older and thinner, his usual confidence replaced by something desperate. "Ms. Hale," he said, extending a hand. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." His voice cracked slightly. I shook his hand, keeping my expression calm. "Of course," I replied. Let's take a look at what needs to be done. Walking through the rooms, I listened as he spoke about budget limits and time frames. He mentioned how everything had gone wrong. Bad business decisions, unpaid taxes, repairs he couldn't afford. He kept talking, trying to sound professional, but I heard the exhaustion behind every word. The pride was gone. I examined the cracked walls, the faded floors, the empty shelves that once held family photos. My footsteps echoed through the same hallways where laughter used to fill the air. He didn't recognize me, didn't even seem to notice the way I paused in each room, taking in what remained of a life that had excluded me. Over the next few weeks, I oversaw every step of the renovation. Reed thanked me constantly, unaware that the woman he relied on was the sister he had discarded. Watching him humbled was strangely quiet, not triumphant, not cruel, just balanced. When the final day came, the house stood beautiful again, restored, shining, alive. Reed stood beside me, smiling weakly. "You saved this place," he said. I met his eyes for a long moment, a flicker of recognition almost sparking before fading away. He didn't know. And for the first time, I was glad he didn't. My revenge was never meant to destroy. It was to stand before him, successful, calm, and untouchable. The final inspection day arrived bright and calm. Sunlight poured through the clean windows, touching every wall I had chosen, every corner I had rebuilt. The house no longer looked broken. It looked alive again. My team packed their tools, and I stood alone in the living room, waiting. I heard footsteps in the hall, and then Reed appeared, his face lined with exhaustion but lighter than before. Behind him came Elaine, moving carefully with a cane, her hair silver now, her eyes dulled by time. I hadn't seen her in years. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She looked around the room and whispered, "It's beautiful." Her voice trembled, the same way it did when she used to sing in the kitchen on quiet mornings. I stayed still, letting her words hang in the air. Reed turned toward me, smiling faintly. "Ms. Hale, you've done more than we hoped for. I don't even know how to thank you." His words carried no trace of the arrogance I remembered, only defeat. I took a slow breath. My hands were steady now. "You don't have to," I said quietly. Then, before either of them could move, I reached into my bag and pulled out my company badge. The gold letters gleamed under the light, Mara Quinn. Reed's face went pale. My mother froze, her eyes widening as she whispered my name. The silence that followed felt endless. I met their eyes one by one, feeling years of buried pain rise to the surface, no longer heavy, just clear. "You said I wasn't one of you," I said, my voice calm. "But look who's rebuilding the life you destroyed." Reed opened his mouth, but no words came. His hands shook slightly as he looked around the house, realizing whose work he had been praising all along. He took a step forward, his expression crumbling. "Mara, I didn't know," he stammered. "If I had." "You did," I interrupted softly. "You just didn't care." Elaine's eyes filled with tears. She clutched the back of a chair to steady herself. "Mara, please," she whispered. "I'm sorry. I should have told you the truth. I was afraid of losing what little we had left." Her voice broke, and she reached out as if to touch my arm, but I stepped back. "I lost everything long before that," I said. "And it wasn't because I wasn't blood. It was because no one ever chose me." Reed sank into a chair, covering his face with his hand. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, like all the years of pride had finally collapsed under their own weight. My mother kept crying, her apologies tumbling into the air, but they felt hollow, too late to fill the years of silence. I looked around at the house one last time. It stood firm now, every wall a reminder that strength could be rebuilt from ruin. "Family isn't blood," I said quietly. "It's loyalty, and you lost that years ago." I turned toward the door. They didn't try to stop me. As I stepped outside, the sunlight felt warmer than it had in a long time. I didn't need their forgiveness, and I didn't need revenge anymore. I had already won by becoming everything they said I could never be. The afternoon sun filtered through the backyard trees, casting warm shadows over the balloons and folding tables. Laughter drifted across the yard, soft and innocent, the sound of children who hadn't yet learned what betrayal felt like. I stood near the edge of the crowd, holding a small gift wrapped in yellow paper. It had been years since I'd seen this many Quinns in one place. Faces that once felt familiar now looked like strangers in borrowed memories. The party was for my niece, a bright, happy girl turning 7. She ran past me, her curls bouncing as she clutched a cupcake. When she noticed me, her smile widened. "Aunt Mara," she shouted, wrapping her small arms around my legs. For a moment, my heart softened. She was the only reason I came. She didn't deserve the bitterness that had poisoned this family. I wanted her to know that kindness could survive even after truth had shattered everything else. I handed her the gift, kneeling so our eyes met. "Open it later, sweetheart," I told her gently. "It's something for your room." She nodded, her grin wide, and darted off toward the cake table. Watching her run, I felt something lift inside me, something like peace, the kind that comes after years of storm. That That's when I heard the familiar gravelly voice behind. Didn't expect to see you here, Uncle Russell said, his tone cautious. I turned slowly to face him. He looked older, heavier with time, though his eyes still held that same sharpness that once cut through my world. For a moment, he tried a smile. Guess things turned out all right for you after all. I studied him, the man whose whisper had once destroyed everything I thought I knew. The church, the confusion, the endless nights of doubt, they all came back in a single heartbeat. But this time, the memory didn't hurt. It only reminded me how far I'd come. I stepped closer, meeting his gaze without a hint of hesitation. My voice was steady, almost calm. You were right, I said quietly. I'm not part of your bloodline. His smirk flickered, unsure whether to take it as an insult or confession. Then I added with a faint smile, and thank God for that. He didn't respond. His face fell slightly, maybe with guilt, maybe with the weight of understanding. But I didn't stay to find out. I turned away, the conversation ending exactly where it should have years ago. As I walked toward the gate, I saw my niece laughing near the cake table, frosting smeared on her cheeks. That sound, the pure joy of it, followed me out to the driveway. For the first time in years, I felt completely free. No more anger, no more pretending, just truth, quiet and clean. I wasn't a Quinn by blood, but I had built something stronger than any name could offer myself. The wind brushed through the trees, and I smiled, leaving behind the noise, the whispers, and the ghosts of a family that never really was mine. I walked away lighter than ever before, stronger, peaceful, and finally my own. Do you think I did the right thing by walking away from them, or should I have given my family another chance? Let me know in the comments. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.